flying cars, robot maids, and dinner at the push of a button. The Jetsons showed us what life would look like in the year 2062, and for one glorious season in 1962, it was the future we all wanted to live in. But behind those 24 episodes were production disasters, career-ending decisions, and predictions that were eerily accurate. These are The Jetsons, 1962. 10 wild facts you didn't know. Number 10. The show only lasted one season originally. Most people remember The Jetsons as a Saturday morning staple that ran for years. But the original primetime run lasted exactly one season. 24 episodes broadcast on ABC from September 1962 to March 1963. That's it. The show was canceled after a single season due to poor ratings, and it wouldn't return with new episodes until 1985, a full 23 years later. The failure was shocking to Hanna-Barbera. They'd created the Flintstones in 1960, and it had been a massive hit, running for 6 seasons in prime time. The Flintstones proved that animated sitcoms could work in evening time slots alongside live-action shows. When Hanna-Barbera pitched the Jetsons as a futuristic counterpart to the Flintstones, Stone Age family meets Space Age family, the network was enthusiastic. ABC scheduled the Jetsons on Sunday nights at 7:30, right before the Flintstones reruns. It seemed like a perfect pairing. But the show debuted opposite 2 powerhouse programs on other networks, Dennis the Menace on CBS and Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color on NBC. Disney's show was particularly devastating because it was broadcast in color, and NBC promoted this heavily. The Jetsons was also in color, which was unusual and expensive for 1962, but ABC had far fewer color sets in American homes than NBC did. The ratings never improved enough to justify the show's high production costs. Color animation was significantly more expensive than black and white, and Hanna-Barbera had invested heavily in making the Jetsons look futuristic and polished. When ABC canceled the show after one season, it seemed like the Jetsons would be a footnote in television history, a failed experiment quickly forgotten. Number 9. It was the first program broadcast in color on ABC. The Jetsons holds a significant place in television history as the very first ABC program ever broadcast in color. This was a big deal in 1962. Color television was still relatively new, expensive, and not widely adopted. Most American households still had black and white sets. NBC had been aggressively promoting color broadcasting since the mid-1950s, but ABC lagged behind. Hanna-Barbera and ABC made the decision to produce the Jetsons in color as a way to compete with NBC and to give the show a futuristic look that matched its content. A show about the year 2062 needed to look advanced, and color was part of that vision. The vibrant color palette, bright blues and pinks and greens became iconic, defining the show's aesthetic. But the color decision created problems. Only about 3% of American homes had color television sets in 1962. Most viewers watched the Jetsons in black and white, missing the visual spectacle that Hanna-Barbera had spent so much money creating. The show's futuristic cities and flying cars looked impressive in color, but were less distinctive in black and white. This contributed to the ratings problem. ABC was paying for color production that most viewers couldn't see. Interestingly, when the Jetsons went into syndication in the late 1960s and became a Saturday morning fixture through the 1970s, more families had color sets. New generations of children discovered the show and saw it the way it was meant to be seen. The color production that seemed like a waste in 1962 became an asset in reruns, helping the show find its audience years after its cancellation. Number 8. George Jetson was only 40 years old. Here's something that surprises people when they learn it. George Jetson, the exhausted, overworked, middle-aged father, was supposed to be 40 years old. Just 40. The character looked and acted much older, perpetually tired, and complaining about his demanding life and his 3-hour work week, but canonically, he was only 40. The disconnect between George's age and how he was portrayed reflects 1960s attitudes about middle age. 40 was considered legitimately middle-aged, even old, in a way that seems strange today. The average life expectancy in 1962 was around 70, so 40 really was middle age. People dressed older, acted older, and were treated as older at 40 than they would be now. George's age also created some math problems that fans noticed. If George was 40 in 2062, he was born in 2022. His teenage daughter Judy would have been born when George was about 24, which makes sense. But the show was made in 1962, meaning George would have been born 100 years in the future. The Jetsons existed in a strange timeline that didn't quite work when you thought about it too hard, but that was part of the charm. Number 7. Jane Jetson's voice actress almost turned down the role. Penny Singleton voiced Jane Jetson, creating one of the most recognizable female voices in animation history, but she almost didn't take the job. Singleton had been a movie star in the 1930s and 40s, best known for playing Blondie in a series of popular films. By 1962, her movie career had ended, and she was working primarily in voice acting and theater. When Hanna-Barbera offered her the role of Jane Jetson, Singleton was hesitant. She was concerned about being typecast in animation and worried that the show might not be successful. She'd also been heavily involved in union organizing for voice actors and was dealing with those responsibilities. She initially told Hanna-Barbera she wasn't interested. The producers persisted, and eventually Singleton agreed, partly because the pay was good and partly because she liked the character. Jane Jetson was supposed to be a modern housewife of the future, stylish, capable, and assertive in ways that women on television in 1962 often weren't. Singleton brought sophistication and wit to the role, making Jane more than just a generic cartoon wife. Ironically, Singleton's concern about being typecast turned out to be accurate, but not in the way she feared. The show's cancellation meant she only worked on it for one season initially. When the Jetsons returned in 1985 for new episodes, Singleton reprised her role. But by then, she was in her 70s. She continued voicing Jane until the late 1980s, creating one of the longest gaps between initial performance and continuation in animation history. Number 6. The show predicted video calls, flat-screen TVs, and smartwatches. The Jetsons made numerous predictions about future technology, and a surprising number of them came true. The show depicted video calls decades before Skype or FaceTime existed. Characters routinely called each other on screens where they could see the person they were talking to, treating this as completely normal. In 1962, this seemed like pure fantasy. Now, it's everyday reality. The Jetsons also showed flat-screen televisions mounted on walls, which seemed absurd when real televisions were massive pieces of furniture with cathode ray tubes. The idea that a TV could be thin enough to hang like a picture was science fiction. Yet by the 2000s, flat-screen TVs were common, and by the 2010s, they were standard. George Jetson's watch served as a communication device, allowing him to make calls and check information. This was a full 40 years before the Apple Watch and other smartwatches became available. The Jetsons imagined wearable technology long before the computer revolution made it possible. Other predictions were close, but not quite right. The show featured moving sidewalks, which do exist in airports in some cities, but aren't as widespread as the Jetsons suggested. Flying cars remain stubbornly unavailable despite decades of predictions. The Jetsons' pneumatic tube transportation system hasn't materialized, though some modern systems use similar concepts for limited purposes. Some predictions were accurate in spirit, if not in detail. The Jetsons showed automated homes where appliances did most of the work. While we don't have Rosie the robot, we do have robot vacuums, smart home systems, and voice-activated assistants. The Jetsons' vision of technology handling household tasks has largely come true, just not with humanoid robots. Number 5. Rosie the robot was supposed to be temporary. Rosie the robot is one of the most beloved characters from the Jetsons, but she wasn't supposed to be a regular character. In the show's pilot episode, the Jetsons buy Rosie from You Rent a Maid, a service that provides robot servants. Rosie is presented as an older, outdated model that the Jetsons get at a discount. The plan was for Rosie to appear in a few episodes and then be written out, possibly replaced by newer robots or other characters. But audiences loved Rosie immediately. She had personality in a way that robots in science fiction usually didn't. She was sassy, had opinions, mothered the children, and wasn't afraid to stand up to George when he was being unreasonable. Voice actress Jean Vander Peel, who also voiced Wilma Flintstone, gave Rosie warmth and humor that made her feel like family rather than a machine. Hanna-Barbera recognized they had something special and made Rosie a permanent part of the cast. She appeared in most episodes of the original season, becoming as central to the show as any human character. In many ways, Rosie represented the ideal of future technology: helpful, intelligent, but also relatable and human-like in the ways that mattered. Rosie's design was intentionally old-fashioned, even for the show's setting. While the year 2062 was depicted with sleek, modern design, Rosie looked retro, like a 1950s appliance with arms and legs. This was deliberate, emphasizing that she was outdated technology the Jetsons got cheaply. But it also made her more endearing. She was the old, reliable servant who might not be flashy, but got the job done better than newer models. Number 4. George's job was intentionally meaningless. George Jetson worked at Spacely's Space Sprockets, where his job title was Digital Index Operator. What did this mean? Absolutely nothing. The job was intentionally vague and meaningless, designed to satirize corporate America and the increasing automation that was already making many jobs redundant in the 1960s. In most episodes, George's work consisted of pushing a single button. That was it. He'd arrive at Spacely's Sprockets, sit at his console, and push a button repeatedly for 3 hours a day, 2 days a week. This was considered a full-time job in 2062. The joke was that technology had eliminated most work, leaving humans with boring, unnecessary tasks that machines could easily do, but were assigned to people to keep them employed. The show regularly depicted George as exhausted by his demanding 3-hour work week, which was funny to audiences in 1962 who worked 40-plus hour weeks. George would complain about his boss, Mr. Spacely, worry about being fired, and stress about work performance, all while doing essentially nothing productive. It was satire, commentary on corporate culture, and automation anxiety disguised as silly comedy. Mr. Spacely himself was a caricature of the demanding boss, short-tempered, unreasonable, constantly threatening to fire George over minor issues. His rival Cogswell owned Cogswell's Cosmic Cogs, and the two companies competed viciously, despite apparently making similar products that nobody understood. The business satire in the Jetsons was sharp, even if many children watching didn't catch it. Number 3. Astro was added because of Scooby-Doo. Astro the dog joined the Jetsons midway through the first season, and his addition was directly influenced by another Hanna-Barbera show. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Wouldn't debut until 1969, but Hanna-Barbera was already developing the character in the early 1960s. They'd hit on the idea of a talking dog with a distinctive voice pattern, and they wanted to test the concept. Astro was essentially a prototype for Scooby-Doo. Both dogs had similar voices, that distinctive drawl where they'd add an R sound to the beginning of words. Both were cowardly but lovable. Both were larger breeds that served as comic relief. Don Messick voiced both characters using nearly identical approaches. When Scooby-Doo debuted in 1969 and became a massive hit, viewers noted the similarities to Astro. The Jetsons didn't need a dog from a storytelling perspective. The family was already complete: George, Jane, Judy, Elroy, and Rosie. But Hanna-Barbera knew that pets were popular with young viewers, and they wanted to test their talking dog character concept. Astro was introduced in the episode The Coming of Astro, where Elroy finds him and convinces his parents to let him stay. Astro became popular enough that he appeared in most subsequent episodes and was included in the opening credits when they were revised. His success helped convince Hanna-Barbera that the talking dog concept would work for Scooby-Doo. In a sense, Astro's role in the Jetsons was a 7-year preview of one of the most successful cartoon characters ever created. Number 2, the theme song is only 13 seconds long. The iconic Jetsons theme song that everyone knows. Meet George Jetson, his boy Elroy, daughter Judy, Jane his wife, lasts only 13 seconds in its original form. That brief opening, paired with the visuals of the Jetson family commuting in their flying car, became one of the most recognizable intros in television history, despite its brevity. The song was composed by Hoyt Curtin, who wrote music for most major Hanna-Barbera shows. He created something catchy and futuristic sounding that would immediately establish the show's tone. The instrumental sections had an electronic, space-age quality that was cutting-edge for 1962, using instruments and techniques that sounded modern and forward-looking. The lyrics introduced each family member efficiently, giving viewers just enough information to understand the family structure before the episode started. The brevity was practical. Longer theme songs meant less time for actual content in a 30-minute time slot that included commercials. But the short theme also reflected the show's concept of an efficient, fast-paced future where everything happened quickly. Interestingly, the theme song went through several versions over the years. When new episodes were produced in the 1980s, extended versions of the theme were created. Later compilation albums and covers expanded it further. But that original 13-second version remains the definitive one, the version that people who watched the show in prime time or in syndication remember most clearly. Number 1, the show's cancellation nearly bankrupted Hanna-Barbera. The Jetsons' failure in prime time was more than just an embarrassment for Hanna-Barbera. It nearly destroyed the studio financially. The company had invested heavily in color production, expecting the Jetsons to be another Flintstones-level hit that would run for years. When the show was canceled after one season, Hanna-Barbera was left with massive debts and a library of expensive episodes that seemed unlikely to recoup their costs. The studio had to scramble to stay afloat. They licensed the Jetsons to syndication, where it eventually found an audience. But the syndication payments in the 1960s weren't enough to cover the losses immediately. Hanna-Barbera scaled back its ambitious plans for future shows, focusing on cheaper productions that wouldn't risk the company's survival if they failed. The experience made Hanna-Barbera more conservative about primetime animation. After the Jetsons, they focused primarily on Saturday morning cartoons, which had lower budgets and less risk. It would be years before they attempted another primetime animated series. The failure of the Jetsons shaped Hanna-Barbera's strategy for the next 2 decades. The irony is that the Jetsons eventually became exactly the success that Hanna-Barbera had hoped for, just not on the timeline they expected. Through decades of syndication, the show developed a massive following. The characters became cultural icons. When new episodes were finally produced in the 1980s, they were based on demand from a generation that had grown up watching reruns. The 1962 failure became a long-term success, though it took 20 years to get there. The Jetsons represents a fascinating moment in television history, a show that failed commercially but succeeded culturally, that made predictions about the future that seemed absurd but turned out accurate, that lasted only one season but influenced decades of science fiction and animation. The 24 episodes produced in 1962 to 63 created a vision of the future that became part of our collective imagination. For those of us who grew up watching the Jetsons in syndication, learning these facts changes how we see the show. That Saturday morning staple we took for granted was actually a commercial failure that nearly destroyed the studio that made it. The futuristic technology that seemed like pure fantasy was based on genuine predictions about where society was heading. The characters we loved were voiced by actors who had fascinating careers outside animation. The show's influence on actual technology development is worth noting. Engineers and designers who grew up watching the Jetsons have openly discussed how the show influenced their work. When creating new products, they'd think about whether this was bringing something from the Jetsons into reality. The show became a kind of blueprint for what future technology should look like and do, even if the specific implementations differed from what was shown. The show's legacy extends far beyond those original 24 episodes. The Jetsons influenced how we think about the future, what we expect from technology, and how we imagine daily life might change. When people design new technology, they're often trying to create things the Jetsons showed us: flying cars, robot assistants, automated homes. The show set expectations for what the future should look like. Expectations we're still trying to meet. Watching the Jetsons today is a strange experience. Some things feel dated: the gender roles, the corporate satire, the assumption that the future would basically be 1962 with better gadgets. But other elements feel surprisingly current. The anxiety about automation, the complexity of work-life balance, the promise and peril of new technology, these themes are more relevant now than they were in 1962. The show also serves as a time capsule of what people in the early 1960s thought the future would be. They imagined technological advancement but social stasis, a world where machines changed but people didn't. They predicted video calls and flat-screen TVs but didn't foresee the internet, social media, or mobile phones. They imagined robot maids but not changing gender roles in housework. The future they envisioned says as much about their present as it does about any real future. If you enjoyed these wild facts about the Jetsons and want more deep dives into classic television, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.